Hey, everybody. Happy Wine Wednesday. I'm sipping on some Chardonnay, and I have my very good friend, Dan, formerly of Seahorse Source, with me today. And we are going to start the Ask Seahorse Source question or interviews that are going to take place over 2 to 3 different episodes over the next, few weeks, months. And the reason that we had to cut it into parts is because we got so many good questions from all of the posts on all the social media. So thank you to everyone who did ask a question, and we will be sure to get them answered. If you're on Instagram, I was thinking, I was trying to find a way to make you guys be able to see just at least Dan, but I couldn't figure it out. So bottom line is, wait, let me try one more thing. Bottom line is, that's not going to work either. Bottom line is, if you want to see our faces as we chat, hop on over to YouTube, Seahorse Whisperer. We're live smack dab, first thing you'll see. Or just listen in on Instagram. That's fine too. We're glad to have you. And all right, now I'll stop my rambling. So just to let you guys know a little bit, and I am going to use my cheat sheet notes here, guys. Sorry, but you know me, I'm not good with memorization. But just to let you guys know, in case you don't know, Dan of Seahorse Source, formerly of Seahorse Source, he's been successfully breeding seahorses for over 18 years. Uh-oh, alarm. um, he maintained a stellar reputation both as a breeder and helping people. For instance, he ran a help desk where many people would call when they had issues with seahorses. And of course, he still runs the Seahorse Sources group on Facebook, which is good. You know, it's a great place for information. But um, well, let's just say talking directly with Dan is the best. So he did that. He's written several articles regarding seahorses. He's done consulting work for various companies. He's given speeches at MBI, different clubs and organizations, and he was very active in multiple forums, which we miss. And then, of course, later, like I said, on Facebook and Seahorse Sources group. So definitely get over there. But what we wanted to do with this is pull him in and have all of his experience come with him and just ask him all of the questions that you guys asked in the post. So welcome, Dan. I'm done rambling.
Thank you, Kelly.
How are you doing today?
Tired but well.
Yes, I mentioned to everyone last week that I got to visit you in Florida, but that I came home and my family got COVID. So I'm like, ugh, geez, I was so worried. But
It's the same thing down here.
yeah,
Everybody's got it. And it's just, I mean, it is what it is, but this might be a good thing if it's going to pass around that much and not be as severe.
crossing fingers, let me tell you. But so if we both sound a little raspy, that would be why. But okay, so the first part one today, we're going to cover the basics, and I'm going to ask my questions, and then I'll let Holly and Cheryl jump in, and then we'll then go to anything in the chat. So if you ask a question in chat, I'm not ignoring you, but we will definitely get to them at the end. Okay, so ask your questions. Feel free. We'll answer them at the end. All right. So this first portion is going to be the basics, and then in part 2 and 3, we'll cover more detailed like breeding and probiotics and that stuff. So today's the basics, but let's get started. All right, Sir Dan. First was a question from Francis, who asked, what should a person ask a store that carries seahorses to ensure that they're captive bred?
Um, this can be a little tough. And I say it can be a little tough because the store or the employer may or may not really know if they are or aren't. All they can do is go by with what they're told. Um, So depending upon where they purchased them from and what they were told is going to be part of the answer. And then sometimes not everybody's completely upfront, but the very first question I would ask them is, are they captive bred? And you can usually tell right away from the response if they're confident that they are captive bred. Now, sometimes they'll tell you where they came from. Many times they won't, but you can ask them, you know, uh, where do they come from? Are they coming from a wholesaler? Are they coming from a breeder? Even if they won't get specific on it. Um, and then the other thing I would probably go into, and it doesn't help you in terms of knowing that they really came from a true captive bred source or not, but I would ask them if they're eating frozen food.
Mhm.
Um, how long, if they are eating frozen food, ask them if you can watch them feed. And then, how long have they had them? And I would also ask a couple of other questions that while I'm asking the questions, and one of the couple of those being, what temperature are they currently keeping them at?
Mm,
There's a good clue if they tell you that they've had them for 3 weeks and they're keeping them at 80, 82 degrees, you might want to consider walking away. Simply because it's too warm and you may end up with problems a week or 2 weeks down the line. Um, and then the last question I would probably ask them right off the top of my head is, have they been treated with anything? And is there any prophylactic medications in the system, such as copper or formalin?
very good. And I think we go into more detail about why those things later. If not, we can at the end. And the second question from Francis is just more in depth, I think. And the question was, if seahorse hobbyists or future owners are interested in advocating for and or partaking in the ethical production of CB seahorses in the pet trade, what questions should be asked? That's really kind of the same
It
question.
it
Go ahead.
is, you know, but my interpretation of that question is trying to promote captive bred, and I'm all for that. Having said that, the most important question is to ask them, of course, are these captive bred? But I don't think I would try to push too much on captive breeding with these people. First of all, because they don't really have any influence other than the fact of where they purchase them from. The other thing is that we're already at the point with keeping seahorses in this hobby where most everything that we get is captive bred. It's getting to be very difficult to get wild caught in unless they're domestic. Um, and the domestic species really aren't in danger. And most people don't want to buy seahorses that are not eating frozen foods. And most wild caught specimens aren't going to be eating frozen foods right away. Um, and the big push for captive bred, since we're already pretty much there, the problem I have is that conservationists have a tendency to push for more than what they want, and sometimes they get that. And when that happens, we end up with more rules, more regulations, and we're already at the point within this hobby where we're having a difficult time getting more species. And that's because of what I want to say, the overzealousness of some of the regulations and the rules and laws that have come into play. Every time a law is written, some bureaucrat starts writing a whole bunch of regulations to go with that law. And most of the time, those bureaucrats have nothing to do with the hobby. And some of their rules and their regs are just so stupid that it's hard to deal with. I mean, we've already seen, I think one of the a couple of examples I know, but one of them is a large shipment coming from Australia that was sent back
Mhm.
because when they opened the boxes, the seahorses weren't hitched. And
Yep.
as soon as you open the box, the seahorse is going to see light. Now they're going to start swimming around and want to get out. And of course, they're not going to be hitched. But in the process of doing that, several $1,000s was lost during that shipment, and people aren't going to keep doing that. And that was a case of some stupid rule or some idiot that didn't know how to interpret the rules. So, I think that for the most part, where you don't see many wild caught species, and there's an occasional one, but for the most part within the U.S. markets, we're not seeing that. So I can't speak for the other countries, but I can say here in the United States, most everything we're getting is already there in the captive bred department.
Gotcha. And before I continue, Dan, in the comments, I do see your question. I'm going to ask the ones that were asked on our post first, but I will get your question at the end. And we're just going to try to zip right through these so we have plenty of time for open chat. But okay, next question, Dan, was, and I know some of these questions he probably won't be able to go into extreme detail, but this is just the basics overview, and you can always ask him or anyone in the group later for more details. But the third question is, what is the best setup for success with a single pair of seahorses? Like size of tank, equipment, filtration. What is your suggestion for a new keeper for a pair of seahorses?
Well, there is no single one best setup. There's many different ways. The great thing about this hobby is there's many different options, many different ways of doing things, and many of them are correct. There is no um, single tank, single filter, or any of that type of stuff that I can say. I think it's going to match the hobbyist, the skill level, in the budget, etc. But in general, I'm going to tell you that I would recommend. This was for a single pair of seahorses.
Yes.
Um, a minimum of 30 gallons tank, and if somebody's doing more than that, then an additional 25 to 30 gallons for each additional pair. I would want some type of really good mechanical filtration to filter out the stuff in the water column. Um, and this can be a filter sock, filter pads, cartridge filters, any number of filters. One of the challenges with a smaller tank like that, if it does not have a sump, is having enough space to put the filters on the tank. And that's another reason why going with a minimum of a 30-gallon tank is ideal. You're also going to want a very good performing protein skimmer. Um, and if running a protein skimmer, I recommend running it on the wet side. And it really should be clean and emptied when the riser tube gets dirty, not when the cup is full. A lot of people make that mistake. And what
Mm.
happens is when that riser tube gets dirty, the efficiency of the skimmer drops and it doesn't pull as much. Um, as far as
Really quick, what the riser tube? I'm sorry, Dan, to interrupt, but
Sure,
I don't even know what's the riser tube.
some people call it the throat, the riser tube, but when the bubbles come up near the
Okay.
top, you
Yep.
get at the top of that tube, it starts becoming crusted with all kinds of junk. And
Mm.
once that junk starts building up, you don't have that smooth surface for the bubbles to slide right up into the cup. So it starts, you know, once it starts getting dirty, you'll see it quickly build up and get thicker and thicker. And when that's happening, you're losing efficiency. Now, some skimmers, it doesn't impact as much as others. In general, the wider the throat is, the less impact it has. But some skimmers, it can be reduced. The efficiency can drop as much as 50%. Just
Wow.
so, we always had the attitude that we cleaned the skimmers every day. And our systems were a little bit unique in that we had so many, but um, even systems that really weren't dirty, we just got in the habit that we did it. And depending upon the bioload in the tank, you know, somebody, you really should get on some type of a schedule that's part of a routine in terms of cleaning that. Um, Also, I would recommend, as far as a substrate goes, to use sand. I would not use crushed coral or um, uh, crushed rock or gravel or anything like that. Having a more solid substrate will help prevent the buildup of organics. Um, Crushed coral and rock will collect a lot of stuff, and it can get nasty in a hurry. And usually you don't have a problem with it right away. It's usually about 9 months to a year later that you start having the issues with gas bubbles and things like that. Um, and then the other thing is, depending upon, where the person lives and what environment they have and what have you, is you should um, have the equipment to keep the tank from getting too hot and from getting too cold. So, if your environment is going to be where your tank is going to exceed 77 degrees, you may want to consider either a chiller or probe. And of course, if you're up north and your house gets cooler than 68, you may want some way of heating the tank.
And really quick, I know this wasn't on the list, but can we just throw out the reason why you recommend keeping the tank under 74 degrees?
Well, under 70, 77 or less.
Okay.
The reason that people recommend keeping seahorse tanks at a lower temperature than what you see normally for a quote unquote tropical tank, even though some of these species are tropical, is that we know from experience that tanks kept on the cooler side, there's less problems with the seahorses. And if you look at people that have kept seahorses for, say, 5 to 10 years, invariably you're going to find some common denominators, and those really apply to this list. And one of them is they have a tendency to keep them closer to 72 to 74 degrees. Stocking density is light, and they're running a really good filtration and a good protein skimmer. And those little things. Anybody can keep a seahorse for 6 months to a year or up to two, but realistically, you should be able to keep seahorses for a very long time.
Yeah. 14 years was one of your clients, right? Who was that? I can't remember.
I've had several that
Was
have gone
okay.
beyond 10 years.
Nice.
I've personally have had seahorses that were in captivity. They came into captivity as adults, and they were in captivity for over 10 years before I retired them to a restaurant.
That's amazing. And I'm going to do very, very quickly, just show you guys. I will be linking these at the end, but I just wanted to show you very quickly. If you go to, this is Seahorse Sources group on Facebook, and it is a private group, so you have to search for it. But if you go to more and then the file section, most of the things we're talking about will be in here, and there is a very good document. I probably won't be able to find it right now, but I will definitely, like, how to, everything basics for tank setup. That's what I was looking for. So literally, you can download that and have that information. You know, that any information you need. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now and move forward. Okay, Sir Dan, next question. Let's see. And another thing I will be linking when we're done is links to other episodes of One Wednesday that Dan came to when he explained some of these questions in more depth, like the ammonia cycle. So can you briefly explain how to use ammonia to cycle a tank? And then I will again link when the time you went into detail. I know it's not an easy one to put into a.
Well, yeah, I have a tendency to get long-winded sometimes.
No, you're fine.
The cycling a tank is really easy, but a lot of people make the mistake of overdoing it. And real simply, what I recommend is, first of all, make sure you have a test kit. Start slow in terms of how much ammonia you're adding, and only bring it up to 1 part per million or 1 milligram per liter for your initial reading. Now, the reason I've come up with that formula is a couple. First of all, it's based on what the anticipated bioload of a given tank is. If you take a 30-gallon tank, for example, that's 113 liters, and 113 liters means at 1 milligram per liter or 1 part per million, that's 113 milligrams of ammonia. Now, that's important because I already know from calculations that the average cubomyces is going to run about 27 to 28 milligrams of ammonia. So if you've got a pair of seahorses in a 30-gallon and you're feeding them 3 times a day, a full cube, which is probably more than what most people would feed, you're still underneath that 113 milligrams.
Gotcha.
So if you go to a 50-gallon and have 2 pairs, and once again, we do the math, you're going to find that the 1 part per million is going to cover it. When you get to your larger tanks, it's actually 1 part per million is actually excessive for what you need, but anything less than that, you're going to have a difficult time with the accuracy of test kits, making sure you got it right. So I recommend it. Bring it up to 1 part per million. Once you have it at 1 part per million with ammonia, you then want to test every day until the ammonia goes away and the nitrites come up. And then wait for the nitrites to come down before you add the next dose. Now, the reason I say that is because the bacteria that eat the ammonia are much hardier and replicate much faster than the bacteria that eats away at the nitrite. And a lot of people don't realize that the molecular weight between ammonia and nitrite are different. Ammonia is, or nitrite is roughly 2.7 times, I get that wrong. 1 milligram of ammonia will turn into roughly 2.7 milligrams of nitrite. So if you keep adding ammonia, what's going to happen is you're going to reach a spike in your nitrites, and it's going to take forever for that nitrite level to come down.
Happened to
So,
me too. Go ahead.
so I think it's important if your readings on either your ammonia or your nitrites are off the scale, my recommendation is to do a water change to the level that it brings it back down to where it's readable. Both of them, if they're too high, they'll stall the cycle. A couple of different reasons, and part of it can be, there's not enough there's not enough oxygen in the water for the bacteria to be promoted to cover that type of a load. And then there's biofeedback mechanisms that happen within the bacteria that can stunt the production cycle. So what you should find when you're doing this method is that the very first time that you add the ammonia is going to take longer for that to go through the whole cycle, but then each time it should be roughly cut in half. And once you get to the point to where you can add one part per million to a tank, And when you do that the first time, make sure you jot down how much you're adding so you know the next time and not have to go through the steps of slowly building it up. Um, and then each time it's just going to get quicker and quicker and quicker. Um, and if you've got a tank that has been fallow, one that has been sitting for several months and you're letting it mature before you add the seahorses, I recommend that you challenge the tank with this method before you place your order for seahorses, because quite often, even though the tank is technically cycled, it may not be cycled to the bioload of adding the seahorses.
So the important parts, if I heard right, is number one, pay attention to how much you add. So the way he's explaining, and again, I'll link when he discussed this in detail. But you just adding ammonia a little bit at a time and testing every 20 minutes till you get to 1 part per million, right?
Correct.
And then you said don't add any more ammonia until not only the ammonia goes down, but you see the nitrates rising. That's the
Nitrates
key.
rise and come back down.
And come back down. So don't do
Yes.
anything until both rise and come back down.
Yep.
Okay. And then also you said you've got the tank cycled, which by the way, you can't have any snails or anything in the tank when you're doing the ammonia cycle, right? Because
It's not good to. There's people that have
yeah.
done it and sometimes they'll survive if they're hardy enough, but it's kind of cruel to any animal to put them through that.
So do this before you get an even cleanup crew. But then once it's cycled, the last key part is before you actually order the seahorses or whatnot to actually put in 1 part per million and make sure it converts in 24 hours to test the system. And what do you do if all of a sudden then you got nitrites real high the next day?
Then you hold up on ordering and go through the process again until it catches up. Now,
Gotcha.
you'll find that it'll catch up much faster because it's already established and
Hmm.
there's already bacteria there. But sometimes it can be a matter of a couple of days, sometimes it can maybe a week, but you'll bring it up. And if you don't wait, then you're going to have problems with a ammonia or nitrite spike once you have the animals in the tank.
And I can say he had to help me through that exact situation. I thought I used the ammonia cycle, but I didn't wait. And I was like adding ammonia. And I thought that, and I saw everything come up and down, but I got the seahorses and bam, I had nitrites really high. And I was like, oh crap. And that's a whole different topic. So just avoid that. I promise. You don't want to go through it. It's awful. Okay. Thank you for that. And then this was another question from Francis from last week, and I'm going to try to say it the best way that I can. But the question was, how often should filtration be changed out? And I think that kind of was referring to like socks and or wheels or whatever. But the actual question was changing. He was changing out all 3 filtration systems and skimmer weekly to keep organics low, but he's still getting algae problems. So what is he not doing well enough, or how often should filtration be clean, changed?
Well, there is no set answer for how often. It's really a matter of the system and when it needs to be done. You know, in a high density system like we did, it was done every day. Um, in a lightly stocked tank that's maybe set up, if I had a typical hobbyist type tank set up as a display that was lightly populated, it might be once a week or, maybe every 5 days or, um, it really depends upon the load in the system, and it's one of those things where you have to watch it and adjust. Now, since he is fighting the algae problem, I would do it at least more frequently for the short term until that's under control.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm sorry. I saw something in the comments. I apologize. But and you know what I forgot to do? I'm trying to do it now as we talk. I meant to do this and have the questions show up when I said them, but I forgot. So I'm going to keep doing it now. All right, and then this kind of goes upon it. What micron stock is best in your opinion? And changing schedule for that.
Um, Part of it's going to depend upon again the system and how much organics are in there. In my experience with our systems, we ran 100 micron was what we finally settled upon. And I tried running 50 micron, which is what I would have preferred. But what I found was they would clog up so quickly that within less than 24 hours, water was overflowing out of the socks. So 100 microns, we could get 24 hours, sometimes even longer if we wanted to. But once again, those got changed every day. Um, so I would probably say shoot for 100 microns. Um, and as the filter becomes dirty, is, remember that the micron size of the holes is going to be constantly shrinking as it's being used. So it's going to tighten up as you're running it. So I just don't think many people can run a 50 micron sock and have it last very long at all. I think you're going to pull your hair out changing the filter, so, the sock so often. So again, it's one of those things where you're going to have to put one in, watch it on a regular basis until you develop some type of a pattern, and then know when to change it.
Absolutely. That so many things are like that, I swear. And we had a great discussion about socks last week, guys. Go watch that. Holly got into the nitty-gritty details. But okay, next question. Trying to get through them so we can get to the chat questions. This we talked about last week too. Do systems with rock have more algae problems in your experience, or what suggestions do you give to seahorse keepers who want to avoid algae? Like, is it a lighting thing? Is it larger water changes? What's your thoughts?
For the most part, having bare systems like we did for production, algae was really not a problem. Those type of systems, we were scrubbing them regularly. Everything had smooth surfaces, so they were easy to clean. There wasn't many places for things to hide and take off. And if anything did start to take off, it was very quickly remedied because of the simplicity of the system. I've had tanks with sand and rock in them. I've done them as experiments, I've done them as displays, and I've done them for different reasons, playing with them. And I've had some that I never had any issues with, and I've had others that I had hair algae problems, and once they took off, it got to be a real pain, and we just didn't look pretty, but we just left it alone. The system was rock stable, just had hair algae.
Mm-hmm.
The all those other things come into play in terms of how often we do water changes, how we do our filters. Lighting can have an impact. The wrong lighting, sometimes new bulbs or new lighting can help remedy the situation. I've never tried using any of the chemical things to do it. Um, I'm a believer in being old school in terms of being physical with cleaning and changing your filters, lights, or whatever else, but not having to dump a bunch of stuff in the tank to try to kill it off.
Gotcha. And I don't want to detour too much because we're getting questions in the comments, but is peroxide in part 2 or 3? Because I know that's
We can discuss peroxide later, but that can be
okay.
a long drawn out thing on that.
Yep. So don't worry, guys. We will talk peroxide, but it'll probably be in part 2. Okay. Next question. Sorry, moving right along. Any suggestions for a safe method to remove sand or clean rock and sand? Like we had a lot of algae, obviously, questions last week, and it was just a case of, is it the rock? How can I remove my sand if it's in the sand, or that kind of thing? Go ahead.
Well, cleaning and removing, to me, although they're somewhat similar, I look at them a little bit differently. As far as cleaning goes, if it's rock, you can temporarily remove the rock and clean it outside the tank and then place it back in the tank, which is, provided it doesn't have coral or something like that on it, is probably what I would do. As far as sand goes, I would use some type of a bell, siphon tube with a bell on the end, and I would clean small portions at a time because you do get a buildup of stuff in the sand, and too much of it really can throw the system out of whack. So I would do small sections at a time. Even if it was on a daily basis, I would only do small sections such as 20-25% at a time. For removing, again, the rock you can just lift out, but the sand I would probably siphon out, again, small portions at a time, 20-25% at a time, unless I had a quarantine tank that I could move the animals to and then just go ahead and attack the whole thing and get it the way I want it and stable before I move the animals back. And I think that would be the ideal way to do it, but not everybody is set up to do it that way.
Right. No, that's a good answer. And that's not one we said last week. That's really smart, quarantine tank. I like it. Okay. How should sorry, getting it up. How should seahorse caretakers quarantine or medically treat inverts and other fish prior to adding them to the seahorse tank display?
So how should we quarantine and how should we treat?
Should you, I mean, like, should you quarantine? Should you treat? And if you needed to, how could you inverts and other fish before you add them to the tank with the seahorses? I think we
Okay.
were talking like, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So in other words, we've already got the tank set up. We've got seahorses in it. Now we want to add stuff.
Right.
Okay. So in that setting, I would definitely have a quarantine tank, and that would be the ideal thing to do is to quarantine and observe. I'm not an advocate of prophylactically treating. If I see something wrong and a need, I will treat, but I don't treat for the sake of just hoping that I can ward off anything. You should be able to, through observation over a quarantine period, be able to tell if there's something amiss. And you're going to find that people that practice quarantine religiously have many less problems than people who buy things and just put them in their tank. Um, you don't have, there's no second chance once you've done that. When you use a quarantine process, you have a second chance in case something pops up, whether it be parasites, bacteria, whatever, hitchhikers, um, any of those things. And the next question a lot of people will ask in addition to that is, well, how long do you quarantine? And, really and truly, I recommend a 6-week quarantine. And I know people will sometimes abbreviate that if they're buying captive bred from a very reputable source. And I guess I won't argue with that, but unless I know it's coming from a source that I have high faith in and know the captive bred, know that there's very, very minimal risk, I would recommend going the full quarantine.
Yeah, exactly. Because like when I bought from you, I would not quarantine the seahorses at least. And so, but anywhere else I would for sure. And maybe not Alyssa's either, but you guys are about the only ones for me. And Francis, I do see you're asking even more great questions. I'm going to get through these that we had prepared, and then I will ask all of yours in the comment section. Promise. All right. Next question that was already given to us. Um, why do most people suggest not adding fish to a seahorse tank?
That's really a great question. And I think a lot of people miss the mark on this and don't really see the full impact of what can happen here. Um, the first reason you don't want to add fish to a tank is because sometimes fish can be aggressive and attack the seahorses or nip at them. And in those cases, you're going to highly stress the animal, and you run the risk, if not injuring the animal, of it being stressed to the point where it becomes sick. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it's not what we see in terms of the fish cohabitating with the seahorses. It's what the seahorses perceive as a threat to them and whether they're uncomfortable with the additions or not. And you can add a fish in there that doesn't outcompete the seahorse for food, doesn't attack the seahorses, but their movements by themselves are enough to stress the seahorses that you end up having issues with the seahorses. Um, a great example of that is my bookkeeper. She had been working for us for a while, and I gave her a pair of H reidi, told her what to get for a tank. She set it up, did everything. She took a pair of reidi home, and for months, everything was fine. And one day she came into work. She was upset. She said she lost her seahorses. And I asked her what happened. And, I asked her a few questions and whatnot. So I gave her another pair. She went home, and within 2 weeks later, she lost them.
Mm.
So this time I went to her house. And when I went to her house and looked at the tank, what I saw was a cleaner shrimp in there. And I asked her, I said, when did you get that? And she goes, oh, just before I lost the first pair. And the,
Mhm.
the cleaner shrimp wasn't attacking the seahorses, but they can stress the seahorses. And so I had her remove the cleaner shrimp. She got another pair and never had another problem.
Yep. Yep. Great
So
example.
So, sometimes, people will say, well, my clowns don't attack my seahorses. Well, yeah, but that still doesn't mean they're not, having stress from the fast movements or same thing with other fish. Now, I will say the size of the tank will often have a very large influence into this equation. If you've got a 125-gallon tank, you may be able to put some things in there that I would not put into a 30-gallon tank. So, the smaller the tank, the more strict you need to be. The larger the tank, the more room there is for error.
Yeah, and I mean, different people have different experiences and success with like Holly's Mandarin and stuff, but it just everything depends, and you got to watch careful. Okay, do different species have different courting behaviors and gestation periods, and why?
Yeah, they do, and because God made them that way. No.
Okay, there you go.
Um, but in reality, it is because nature said so. I mean, it really boils down to the perpetuation of the species. The animals have evolved to where they do what they need to for the species to survive. And in the seahorse world, what you'll notice is that the smaller and more fragile the fry, the more fry and the more
Hmm.
often they have fry occurs. So, you take one species that has much larger fry that are easier to raise. Um, they don't need to have as many fry because more make it. Um,
Gotcha.
and the other factor that could probably equate into that is probably the environment in which they live in and how much predation is upon the species.
Mm. So you're telling me that the Barbori are strong little suckers because they only have a few little fry and they take forever?
Yeah, if you look at Barbie's a great example because they can have very small batches. I've seen them have as small as a half dozen to a couple dozen at a time. They can have a little bit more, um, but they don't have that many batches. Where you take H. reidi, once they get cranking, man, it's every 2 weeks, and I've seen them put up to 2,000 fry in a single batch.
That's insane. And guys, the reason my face keeps disappearing is because this I keep hacking. I didn't want to do it live, so apologies if you see me disappear. Okay, next question because You guys are asking great questions. I got like 5 more of the prepared, and then we'll get to yours. What is the easiest species to keep and breed, and why,
Well,
in your opinion?
the easiest one to keep are the plastic seahorses, like I have on my fridge with a magnet. Um,
Right? My stuffed
uh,
seahorse.
The I would probably argue, at least in the United States, I would argue for H. erectus, and aside from the availability of them, um, they are among the hardiest. And you're also going to find a very large network of seahorse keepers that have them, and you're going to be able to get notes and compare notes with other people very easily. If you bring in a species, manage to get a species that nobody else has, it's going to be hard to find advice unless if nobody has experience with that particular species. Then unfortunately, we don't see as many species in the U.S. as we once did, and um, erectus are being produced commercially primarily as the primary species because they are hardy, they're easier to keep, they're more profitable because of being hardier.
Gotcha. And I'm going to jump down to a different question that kind of follows along this. Do you think we'll see different species in the U.S. again? Like right now, there's only. I mean, I'm impressed that like Cheryl and Heather and Francis have tiger tails, and we'll discuss Francis's issue with the tiger tails in just a minute. But do you think or is it just? I think you've told me before that it's just, and the reason you're not doing seahorse source anymore is because it's just not cost effective to do all those different species, or is that
Well,
accurate? Or
there's multiple things that come into play. The first and the primary issue we have at the moment is getting other species in the country because of conservation and the big push to all these laws and whatnot on captive breeding. It's made it very difficult to collect the specimens to set up a breeding program. And when I first started, I went out and collected my own specimens, and that was how I started initially. And um, that was with the erectus. I didn't collect all the different species, but that was how I started with my first setup. um, when they're collected professionally like they were originally when I first started in the hobby, there was a lot of collecting that was being done and a lot of losses in the process, from poor handling, from excessive time being held before they went to market, poor conditions. Some were a matter of bycatch and just dumped into buckets for a
Mhm.
day or two while they're at sea. um, a whole slew of things. But it's gotten to the point now where I gave that example of, that Australian shipment which was lost. But
Mm-hmm.
that's only one example. We were trying before I shut down. I was trying to work with another person, and we had two species coming from Europe, and they got shipped. They arrived in the United States. There was multiple boxes, and the customs officer in the European country signed all the paperwork except for one page for one of the boxes.
Mm-mm-mm.
Fish and Wildlife confiscated the entire order
Oh,
and gave them to a public aquarium that had agreed to buy half the shipment, which was going to help cover our costs so we could get the whole thing done. And so they ended up getting it for free, and that whole shipment was a loss, and that was again a few $1,000s.
oh,
So, it that was two species that would be in the market today in this country had that gone through. And I can promise you, when a public aquarium gets an order like that, they're not setting up a breeding program to make sure that everybody, they can be
right,
available on the market.
right.
Um,
And it's sad
so
too that, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So you have a huge cost in terms of bringing them in, number one. And then number two, anything that goes wrong is going to increase that cost. And then not only do you have that, but you also typically have a year or two of um,
Conditioning
time,
and
yeah,
yeah,
conditioning, getting the program going. I always figured that when I brought a specimen, it was probably going to be a year to a year and a half before I would be selling off stuff to get a return on the investment.
yeah.
And it's a lot of work, and it doesn't always pay off. I've had, if you look at the species that I've carried over time, is I don't remember how many, it's close to a dozen or so. But there were several of them that it took 4 and 5 attempts before I got the program off the ground.
Hmm. And people don't realize how much work it is. We'll get into that in breeding in part 2 or 3. But yeah, like the zebras that supposedly made their way to the U.S. and nobody ever heard anything else. I mean, it's now I think it's been a year and
Yeah, I don't expect to see much from those. And, to be quite frank, we don't know how good they are at being, a captive specimen for display.
right, there are
Um,
some species that just don't
we, we,
work.
we, we know that some of the species, whether it be Cuda, erectus, reidi, hippocampus, gutloaded, etc., we know some of these are, if not in use here, elsewhere, that are doing well. And we should really focus on the ones that do well, not try to get the exotic exotic specimens that we don't know much about. I think we don't have enough species available now. We shouldn't be fighting for those.
Absolutely. That goes back to, promoting the effort, the captive breeding effort is, don't try to get I'm guilty. I bought probably one of each species that Dan raised. Maybe not but at least 4 or 5 of them because I wanted the cool, unique, blah blah blah. But that's when he was raising them and they were readily available. And as Mercury Burning said, a lot could go wrong in that year when you're preparing and conditioning and so,
Yep.
it's yeah. Okay. All right. Next question. Sorry. I know we kind of jump around, but want to get all through. We're almost done with the prepared questions. Why can reedi and erectus be mixed, but not other species?
That there is no scientific answer. In other words, there's no study to come out and tell us why we can and why we can't. What we know is primarily from trial and error and many years of doing that. And we know from doing it that generally speaking, if you mix reedi and erectus, there's usually not a big deal doing it. Now, some of the species, when you mix them with other species, often crash. And a good example of that is H. ingens, that if you put it with any other species, you're likely going to lose that species as well as whoever you mixed them with. Um, there's some theories as to whys, and my late wife had the idea that animals that came from the same general geographic location are probably good candidates to mix, but not try to mix different oceans. Um, Again, we don't have the science to definitively say what the exact cause is, though some of us have our suspicions on gut bacteria, etc. But All I can say is that experience has shown that mixing those two species generally does well. Mixing many others with, when you started mixing Pacific specimens with Atlantic specimens, generally speaking, they don't do well.
Well, yeah, and that makes sense. I would think it would have to do with temperature too, which is associated with the gut tissue and all that good stuff. Which we can go into more detail later. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there is something to that, but I don't think that the extremes for most cases aren't enough. I've had two customers who put erectus in with abdominalis, and they did so successfully. But most people aren't going to keep H. erectus at below 68 degrees.
Right, right. Gotcha. Okay, yeah, and Ray's still looking. If you're in Canada, Ray's still looking for someone who wants to adopt his abdominalis, but you got to have a chiller. Okay, next question. Arian, I believe it is, asked, I have two captive bred seahorses about 17 months now. Can I add new ones as the new ones would be babies and much smaller? Does it matter?
It does, and again, there's always some risk when you add anything to the tank, but assuming that the tank is, adequate in size to add more, I wouldn't have a problem with that. Um, if these are babies that we're adding, I do recommend that number one, they be eating frozen food first, and number two, they be at least 3 to 3.5 inches in size um, before adding them. But I really have no issue adding smaller seahorses with larger ones. It's very rare that there's a problem with doing that.
Oops, sorry. Very, very good. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. Hang on. All right, there we go. Hit the wrong button. Okay, next. What is the best way to avoid high organics in a tank without a sump?
That can be a challenge.
I'm
The
living it.
yeah, the advantage of a sump, besides giving you more water volume, gives you a much larger selection and equipment to run. And um, the challenge is on a tank without a sump is that most of your equipment is going to be things like a hang on the back filter, a hang on the back protein skimmer. Um, you can run a canister filter, um, but it's going to be get the best equipment you can get for that size tank, and then, if possible, go to a larger tank, um, and then it's going to come down to water changes, and don't overstock it.
Gotcha. Sorry, stupid kids. Okay. I've got two K1 questions and two feeding questions, and then we're going to the chat. So we're almost there, I promise. We're hitting on that hour too. How does K1 media work, and why do you suggest it or why did you use it? Sorry, versus other media.
Yeah, I used it, and it was my primary biological filter. My sister was the one who first put me on to K1 media, and you know, K1 media, for those who don't know what it is, it's a type of plastic media that has a very high amount of surface area. Now, it can be run as either a fluidized type filter or a static filter. In general, most people run it as a fluidized filter, and it works a little bit different than your standard sand fluidized filter. Those type filters, the sand is constantly churning, and if you lose power or anything happens, that sand settles and it becomes hypoxic real quick, and the system will crash. What's really cool about the K1 media is that it's positively buoyant, and by being positively buoyant, you have less risk of the filter crashing. Um, and this type of a filter, the usually as it's set up as a fluidized filter, the media is churning, and the media is not perfectly smooth. So as it's churning, it's being roughed up, and that causes the old
lid, which has a little.
Oh, hang on, Dan. I thought I could
little
share it while
T
you were
on the
talking. I
end of
guess
it.
I
You
can't.
can
Let me
see in
stop
there.
sharing. Sorry, I was trying to show the K1 media. So sorry.
That's all
Go
right.
ahead.
So the churning aspect exfoliates the old bacteria. New bacteria, which is more efficient, comes in play, and it holds a high amount of it. So it's just a very effective media that, for the size of it, um, does a tremendous amount of stuff. My filters on my tanks, I was using a 3-gallon carboy half filled with K1 media, and it could handle a quarter of a pound of myces a day with no problem in terms
Man.
of biological filtration.
I'm telling, and I actually do have a video, guys. I just got to get it posted. I'm really slacking. I've been sick, whatever. But I do have a video of my making my little K1 media reactor for the all-in-one tank. So you can do it even in an all-in-one tank. I just used a 1 liter bottle. I'll get that up. I will, I promise. But okay, next question. And this actually did happen to me. I went to Florida, you guys know. And so the question is, if a K1 reactor stops spinning, and I'm not sure how long it hasn't been spinning, what are the possible consequences and what should be done? And this literally happened to me. I came home and I realized that the air pump that was connected to my K1, making it spin, had like, you know how those little air pumps, they don't last long, and it just at some point it was still running, but it was putting only bubbles into the K1 reactor but not making it spin. And I had no idea. I'd been gone a week. It could have been sitting there for 3 days. It could have been sitting there for one. So what did you tell me to do, Dan?
Well, first thing is turn it back on.
Right?
Um, the thing is that you need to remember, and a lot of people don't realize that K1 media can be used as a static filter. In
Oh,
other words, it could be done without it spinning. Now, the problem with that is that, you know, when you look at the K1 media, and if you've ever actually had it and looked at it, you can see if it's not churning, it's very easy for a lot of detritus to get trapped in it. So it can get junked up real quickly in a static setting. So I don't recommend a static setting, but if it's getting, you know, as long as it hasn't become hypoxic, you still should have adequate bacteria. And in most cases, you can turn it right back on. And that's what I love about it as opposed to a sand type fluidized filter. You know, if that puppy crashes and stops running in a matter of, you know, less than an hour, you're starting to lose your biological. This stuff, I've been more than one occasion where we've had pump failures or this, whatever reason, and our media wasn't churning. We plugged it back in and away it went and never had a problem. Now, it is possible to have a problem and you should check your parameters, but in most cases, unless it's become really hypoxic, odds are you can plug it back in and away you go.
what's hypoxic mean? I know it's not on the list, but
Low on oxygen.
gotcha. Thank you. In case it was over anybody else's head. Not mine, just, you know, being sure. Anyways, that he gave me that advice. I turned it back on. I was just worried that all that gunked up stuff would be put into the water, create high organics, and I'd have ammonia or something. But I had zero problems. It was really cool. I turned it back on and worried, but then everything was fine. Okay, last two little questions. How often and how much should a pair of seahorses eat? How do you determine how much to feed them?
Well, no, seahorses like people are not going to eat the same amount as, you know, if you take each seahorse is going to be unique in terms of how much they want to eat. And that can be their own preferences. It can be their growth rate, how old they are, whether male or female, how active they are, all these different factors. But what I used to do as a general rule was first of all, they should be fed a minimum of twice a day, ideally 3 times a day. In the wild, they're constant grazers where they eat whatever's available whenever they can. Now, in a tank, with a pair, I usually recommend starting off with somewhere between a half to a cube of myces per feeding. I'd probably start with a half, and I may work up, or in some cases, may even work down slightly. But I would start with a half cube, see how they eat it, and then decide if I want to increase it or decrease, or if it's the correct amount. So it's going to take a little bit of experimentation, but you can figure somewhere between a half to a cube of myces per feeding.
And then, and I think we've talked about this endlessly before, but basically, you go back in 10 minutes and remove anything that's not eaten, and then you can feed less or more based on that, right?
You can. Everybody does it slightly different in that respect. It is a good idea to go back if they haven't eaten the food and remove any uneaten food, unless you've got a massive cleanup crew that, in that case, you shouldn't see it anyway.
True. But as Ray always says, even if the cleanup crew eats it, it's still pooing it out. It's in the water. But no, I hear you. Okay. And then finally, do seahorses need live foods, or and should they be gut loaded, the live foods? And I know we'll
Um,
go into this detail. This will be detailed in our part 2 or 3 where we talk about probiotics and all of that. But go ahead, Dan. You want to briefly?
Yeah,
or
you
not
know,
work?
I think it's a good thing to augment their diet with some live foods. And that can be problematic for some people. You know, if you're living in the center of the country or, you know, somewhere where it's hard to get live foods and it's very expensive. Um, you know, I've had customers who've had seahorses for well beyond 5 years that never fed them anything but frozen food. So they do that? Absolutely. Can you? I do think that live foods are great for multiple different reasons. And as far as gut loading goes, it really depends upon what you're getting. You know, if you're getting Artemia, you would need to gut load that because it's not nutritionally complete to begin with.
Mhm.
Um, but by the same token, if I just got a bunch of grass shrimp in, I don't know that I would be trying to gut load them to feed them. Now, if I was holding on to them, I would be feeding them as I held on to them, so that wouldn't be an issue either. Live mices, you know, if you bring those in, if you want to gut load them, you can. But I think you know, I think it's such a treat just to give it to them anyway. Unless I was on a special breeding program and really trying to condition the animals, I probably wouldn't go through the hassle. Because essentially, for like mices, you're going to have to hatch Artemia, gut load the Artemia to gut load the mices, and it's a drawn out process.
Which is different when you're talking about breeding in part
Yes.
2 or 3. You'll hear all about that, guys. And I lied. I did have one more, and then we're going to everybody else and letting share. What suggestions do you have to help a seahorse stay bright and yellow?
Um, the first thing is to have a stress-free tank. If you have stress in the tank, it's going to be hard to get the animals to color up. So I think sometimes people are shoving you know what against the tide because they don't realize that they have stress in the tank and they don't understand why the animals aren't coloring up. Um, the other thing is going to be, aside from, you know, keeping the stress down, is going to be to have some color in the tank, you know, colorful hitches and with as well as the environment. If you've got, say, a black background, a lot of live rock and live sand, generally speaking, it's kind of hard for the seahorses to become a bright color to do what they do normally, and that is to blend in with the environment. So, you know, I used to tell people the gaudier the tank, the more colorful the seahorses. And, you know, if you've got a lot of colorful hitches and got a colorful background and, you know, don't have a whole lot of, you know, neutral colors in the tank, it's going to be easier for the seahorses to pick a color and go to. And the other thing that can come into play that a lot of people don't realize is you can also have a dominant seahorse. So
Mm.
sometimes adding and subtracting a seahorse can impact the colors within the tank with among the whole herd.
Gotcha. And I would say we talked about this, I think, last week because Cheryl, who I'm getting ready to add to the program now, has these beautiful orange seahorses. And I got orange seahorses, and mine turned first pink and then the color of the rocks because I have rocks in the tank. But Cheryl's tank has these beautiful fake orange things. And of course, you know, it doesn't look like a natural tank. Well, hers kind of does, but listen, I'm talking about her. She's not even she can't reply yet, but bottom line is, yeah, I think that rock has a lot to do with it. I think that's an excellent answer. Also, I was doing two things at once. Did you mention the blue background? Because
I
that does
mentioned
help, doesn't it?
background. Well, what it's interesting because when you start adding color, it's not always the results don't happen like you think. So, for
Mm,
example, if I put yellow hitches in, they'll typically try to match the yellow hitches. If I put orange hitches in, they'll turn more to an orange. If I put red hitches in, they turn black.
right.
Um, you know, with backgrounds, blue, we found that the background that you see in the picture behind me is a blue background on a tank, and the seahorses in that picture came from a wholesaler who gave them to me to turn them yellow so he could sell them as yellow seahorses. So
Oh my gosh.
he sent me 100 black reedi, and that was 2 weeks after he sent them to me of them changing color, and that was just a blue background tank with yellow hitches.
Wow. I mean, it does seem like, you know, if you want the color, you're gonna have to do a tank that's yellow hitches and blue and not, you know, rock and natural. Have you ever seen a natural tank sport? Yeah,
Yes,
just
yeah,
depends.
it can happen.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna add. I thank you. First of all, I'm going to add Holly and Cheryl now, and then we're going to ask the comments in the chat. Thank you for everybody who came. Thank you, Dan, for taking the time to come. And don't forget, if you heard any of the, we really perused over these topics. I will link other resources for you when we're done in the comment section. But if there's anything that didn't answer your question good enough, just ask in the comment section. I do check the comments. And so if you ask a question, we'll answer it next time. And Dan has already agreed to come back for part 2 and 3. So if you didn't hear your question asked, it will be in part 2 or 3. We're going to get into peroxide, medications, vacations, all that good stuff in the part 2 and 3. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can know when we go live with that, and I will post about it. I'm going to add the others now, but I just wanted to thank you, Dan, for taking the time.
Yep. Excuse me just for a minute, if you will.
Yes, of course. And hopefully you can still hear, though, because here's Dan.
I got remote heads on.
All good. Okay. Dan in the comment section asked, how do I encourage, oh, wait, first, Holly, Cheryl, welcome. Sorry, I'm jumping into so fast the questions. Okay, let's get through theirs, and then I'll ask you guys how you're doing, because our Dan may have to go soon because, you know, he's got a life. But how do I encourage seahorses to breed? I got 2 pairs of captive bred seahorses about 4 months ago, and they have been healthily eating every day, dancing and playing with each other, but no signs of breeding.
That would be very unusual with seahorses unless they're very young. I've got a very young male who barely has a pouch who has decided to start courting the largest female in the tank, and he's circling with her now. But it does depend on the condition of the seahorses, their tank parameters. Is there something in the household that's stressing them, that's preventing them from being able to relax and go into a courtship behavior? Or is it, is it 2 males and 2 females? Is there too much competition?
Well, the only, and part of the question was, what can he do to encourage the breeding? And I think Dan will have some maybe temperature and lighting thoughts, maybe.
Exactly.
I don't know. We'll hear. But I can tell you, Dan, that my seahorses, I've got 2 tanks of seahorses currently, and I thought one of my males was pregnant because I saw everything except for the exact egg exchange. I saw her get fat. I saw them courting and spinning and dancing. I saw them trying to do the exchange. And then he got fat and he was no longer opening his pouch to inflate and deflate it. And so I thought he was pregnant. And then, I don't know, we discussed it on a previous week. Maybe he absorbed them. I'm not sure, but I never saw Fry. I'm still hoping for Fry. But I wouldn't be too discouraged at 4 months. I know Cheryl's the master breeder. You have to understand. So she snaps and plays some Sinatra in the background, and her seahorses are getting frisky. We all don't have that awesome, breeding finger. But Dan, please.
Yeah, there's a couple things to think here. First of all, it can be the seahorses themselves, and it could be the environment. And when I say the seahorses themselves, let's face it, all of us know somebody that no matter what, we would never mate up with.
So true.
So sometimes that's the case. More often than not, though, it's usually the environment, and sometimes it can be where the tank is located, where you have external stimuli that's impacting them. Sometimes it can be the flow in the tank. Not just how strong it is, but the type of flow and what type of turbulence it creates, and little things like that. Sometimes it can be just it's interesting that we would always have multiple pairs for breeding pairs, and we always had 2 or 3 pairs that were steady in production. We'd have a couple pairs that were occasional, and then we'd have some pairs that no matter what we did, we couldn't get them to breed.
Mm-hmm.
So we would try first changing them into different tanks, or we would try changing different partners. But invariably, when we couldn't get them to breed, we'd sell them. Then, I swear to God, every time I would sell a breeding pair that did not breed, customer would call me 2 weeks later and it's go, what do I do with the fry?
Yep.
So sometimes it's just changing the environment around that does the trick. It could be different water parameters. It could be different temperature. It could be different flow patterns in the tank, different lighting. Um, who knows exactly what was the trigger, but it happens. So
Well,
I would be persistent with giving them time. I don't give that time frame enough to say that those two are going to cut it or not cut it. I
How long do
usually
you usually give?
it,
6 to 9 months.
Okay.
it's so dependent. They all have different personalities.
Mhm.
And several years ago, I raised some combs, tiger tails, and one little male managed to figure out a way to turn just his pouch red, but it was a little bitty pouch. Well, all the females were really intrigued, and one kept going over to him, and he started dragging her around in circles, literally, trying to get her to dance. She
Wow.
finally swam up and hitched to the top of his head.
Nice. Hey, Dan, real quick though, when you were really focused on trying to get seahorses to breed, like in conditioning, which we'll talk about in the breeding section, but does the higher temperature get them frisky or lower? What's the trick with that? I can't remember.
Well, it's a combination of changing the lighting period and the
Oh, okay,
temperature together. And what you're trying to do is mimic the seasons. So
gotcha.
quite often, you can lower the temperature slightly, decrease the lighting period, and that can work. And sometimes the reverse is true. So depending upon what spectrum I'm keeping the tanks is what I'm going to do. And, that can take a little bit of time for that to kick in too. So, you have to give that time to them to do that.
Right. And I like the flow thought too, because I know in the all-in-one, I think that's part of my problem is that the flow's so like there's not as many spots where an egg transfer could happen. Okay, moving right along because we got a few questions to get to, and I don't want Dan to have to go because they're important. Okay, hi, this is Francis. I may have a potential Uronema problem with the tiger tail male juvie due to the LFS having them in a dirty sump. Oh no, I'm concerned on when to tube feed as he hasn't eaten for the last 4 hours. He is trained on frozen mysis shrimp, but he hasn't shown interest. And I don't see the end of the question.
I've been working with Francis on this
Okay.
because apparently this pair was in deplorable conditions. Francis took them in, and he's had problems off and on ever since then. He's done freshwater dips; they'll start to improve, and a lot of other things. So I'm at the point now. Most recently, I suggested he start them on antibiotics. There's no lesions or discolorations that would be indicative of Vibrio or Myco, but that they just are not functioning like they should. And I'm starting to suspect, I'm not sure it's Uronema, but I'm starting to suspect that they have an internal parasite infection. And this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Dan. Uh, we can no longer get quick cure. He tried to get some chloroquine phosphate and was unable, the vet would not give him a prescription for that. So that leaves us with the option of either Paragard or Metro.
Well, metrodiazonol is a recommended drug for treating Uronema. So, and the metrodiazonol is going to be easier on the seahorses than the chloroquine would be. Did he
Yes.
already go through a formalin treatment?
Francis, I believe he did.
He's still with us. So Francis, did you already try formalin? And you can read what the rest of the question. Go ahead. Yeah.
The other question I have, are the seahorses breathing normal or do they have
The
accelerated breathing?
the videos he's shown me, there's no trigger indication of excess trigger movement, nothing abnormal in, as far as I could tell, in the gill structure. The problem is the one seahorse that has the biggest problem is almost black, so I can't tell if the operculum is much darker than the rest of the seahorse, which is I found was common with Uronema in the past. So
Yep.
that I can't use as a diagnostic.
Okay. And we did a freshwater dip
Yes, several times.
and the
And
results?
they will improve briefly.
Yeah, but I mean the reaction in the dip.
Francis, I understood that he actually pulled them out early the first time. Okay.
Sorry guys, I'm trying to deal with kids and trying to find the rest of the comments. Francis said, yes, I think that was to the Furon too. But I believe he did freshwater dip too. The female improved without any other symptoms. However, the male is declining.
Okay. So if it was me, with what information I have at hand at the moment, there's a couple things I would do. First of all, I would have them in some type of a bare bottom quarantine type tank for
They
treatment.
are.
Okay. I would, um, I think we said something about tube feeding because they hadn't eaten in 4 hours. Did I hear that
Yes.
correctly?
Yes.
I wouldn't start tube feeding until it's been 2 or 3 days without eating. But what I would do in the meantime is I would get a hold of some vitamin B12 from a health food store. There's a product out there called Shot-O-B12. It comes in 5,000 microgram capsules, and I would add 5,000 micrograms per 10 gallons once a day for 3 days. And vitamin B12, the reason I say to do that is it will help boost the animal a little bit in terms of their energy level, but more importantly, it can act as a very strong appetite stimulant. Doesn't always work, but in many cases it does. So I would go ahead and try that. I would also get a hold of metrodiazenolol, and I doubt, especially since they're eating, you don't want to try to do it orally, but I would go through a period of treating with metrodiazenolol for at least 2 weeks and see what the results of that is.
Yeah. He also just posted that the first time he did the freshwater dip, the male that's having the problems started to go unresponsive on him. Both dips were a maximum of 10 minutes.
Also, he said he mistyped. It wasn't 4 hours, it was 4 days since the seahorse has eaten.
Yeah.
Okay.
This has
So,
been going on.
Have
for
you guys
quite some
ever had
time.
luck with tube feeding though?
yes,
Really? Okay, go ahead, Dan.
many times.
Okay.
So if we're going to tube feed, I would probably, if you know how to do it, you have to make up a gruel. You got to crush up some frozen myces and try to get it into a tube that's adequate for injecting into the seahorse. And it's hard to tell you how to measure
So
this, but
sorry.
I would take a very, very tiny amount of metrodiazenolol and B12 and add it to the gruel when I'm tube feeding. And generally speaking, roughly an 18 gauge catheter is ideal for tube feeding. Ideally, are these small or large?
They're small.
Okay. So a standard 18 gauge catheter, IV catheter, would work for this purpose with a small 1 cc syringe. If you don't have one and can't find one, if you contact me offline, I can send one to you. I still have those.
Okay.
I did also say that I'll type all the things that you're saying in the comments and attach it when we're done. But I'm trying to. He keeps posting, and I want to make sure you see everything he says. I don't know if you guys can see the chat, but he has Metro and he has been gut loading. Current hospital tank is bare bottom has Furon 2 and Paragard day 2. Should he finish what he started with that or switch now, Dan?
I would drop the Paragard. And I
Okay.
would continue with the Furon 2, but I would add the metrodiazenolol to the Furon 2. You can mix those two without a problem.
And should he treat both male and female since the female's better?
Are they both in the same tank?
Are they both in the same
Have been
tank,
up until
Francis?
very recently.
Ideally, I would, because I'm going to assume that whatever the male's suffering from, the female is, and if not, will be.
Okay, and should he blend Metroplex and B12 and Focus too?
Well, Focus is used as a means of making the food stick to something. So
Yeah,
if I'm tube feeding, I'm not going to use Focus in the tube feeding.
exactly.
I would use, Focus is designed to put on the myces so stuff sticks to the myces.
And I think, I know Francis asked a bunch of questions, so we'll get to all of them, I promise. But I'll ask the video question in a minute because I know you asked about freshwater dips too. But both in the quarantine tank because the assumption is they both have it. So, would he still do the B12 though? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm trying to do 15 things at once.
Yeah, I
So
still recommend it.
B12, Metroplex, and
I
go
would
ahead.
I would do B12 for 3 days to see if it works. If it works, I might continue onward a little bit longer. B12 is harmless. Uh, Most of the time, it'll have a little bit of color to it, but that's not a big deal. But you want to get a capsule. You do not want tablets. Capsules are much easier. And again, it's 5,000 micrograms, and you have to hunt for the 5,000 microgram capsules. That's why I recommended that one product. A lot of times it's sold in very small microgram capsules, which you could take a dozen of them just to do one treatment.
Mm. Okay.
This has been they were in despicable environment and he took these were his first seahorses when he took them home.
Yeah,
Aw.
that makes it tough. And
Yeah,
you
and it
know,
makes it really tough for him. And it's one of those things they'll start to improve and then they'll start to crash again. And
that's very common with Uronema and mycobacteria.
exactly.
They'll go up and down. And unfortunately, with Uronema, it depends upon where the damage is done as far as recovery goes.
Absolutely.
I've seen recovery, and I've seen no matter what somebody's done, the damage was just too far.
There's too much. Yeah, no, it depends on how long it's been going on. It depends on the individual seahorse. I've already explained to him how the Uronema actually, basically, without trying to sound vulgar, eats them from the inside out.
Yep, it's exactly what it does. They're
Hmm.
insidious little, you know what.
Yeah.
Well, and I did find the rest of his original question, and he did say that he's trained on frozen shrimp, but he hasn't shown any interest in rinsed mysis or the live gut-loaded brine shrimp amphipods. So. I mean, try the B12, and then try
The prognosis is not real great, but at the same time, I don't consider this a complete lost cause at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's still possible to turn this around, but I will say it's going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah. He knows that. He's already aware of that. I
And
told him
Cheryl,
you were going to be on here tonight, and I was going to ask you because you were my mentor.
yep. And if when you get someone like Cheryl or Dan helping you, you're in the best hands you can be. And gosh, my heart goes out to you. I'm crossing fingers for recovery. Please keep us updated. And one of the questions Francis also had was, and I think Dan's looking something up, so we'll go back to it. But is there a video on any of the things we've discussed, or like on freshwater dips for seahorses? I don't know if there's one out there. I actually have one that I'll share with you because it's not edited yet, but touch base with me on the side. And when it comes to these detailed questions, guys, anybody watching this is why it's so important to get with, somebody one-on-one. Like Dan talks all the time about the Facebook group being excellent, but when you've got 50 people jumping in and saying stuff, you don't have that one-on-one. Okay,
Yeah.
what's the tank look like? What's the parameters? What's this symptom? What's that? It's just, he was a paramedic, so and he was Cheryl's mentor and mine and Holly's. So
Well, these seahorses were very typical too of what we see commonly sold in terms of little, very young combs that probably should not even have left the breeder yet.
gotcha.
Do we know
Yeah.
which metrodiagonal he's using?
Which metro are you using, Francis? Answer in the comments and I'll read it. But also, as to these questions, guys, we're doing part 2 and 3. One of them will be focused on medications, and you will be able to come and ask specific questions like this. So make sure you subscribe and show up for it because we will help you. But let's see. Oh wait. Okay. I'm sorry. Now I'm going back and forth here. Is it possible to send the videos? Oh, Francis. You know what? Do you want to jump in right now? You can jump into the live stream if you feel like it, and then you can share the videos.
Yeah.
Cheryl, can you send him the link? Are you able? Oh, you probably can't. Francis, are you my friend on Facebook? We do have some other questions we got to get to, but you know what? Let me ask one other question, a separate question, and then I will try to get you in here so that you can show the videos. Okay? So let me
Yeah,
find.
I mean, he's done a great job of sending me pictures and I'm not worried particularly about Vibrio or Myco because of the condition. What I'm concerned with is an internal parasite.
Okay, well, you guys answer this while I try to get him in here. Are there articles or anecdotal experiences on aquatic husbandry of Hippocampus subligatus or hystrix?
The other reason he's asking that question is because he walked into a local fish store and he found a pair of very unusual fish, and he picked them up. They're in a separate tank. They're not in the same tank or anything. And he sent pictures to myself and Alicia and several others. And the general consensus was that they were Hippocampus hystrix. Well, we haven't seen those coming into this country in a long time. So the question then became were they were they captive bred? And if so, who imported them?
Is Francis in California by any chance?
Yes. Yes.
I will say this from talking to local fish stores in Northern California, where I live, where I was able to sell some of my captive bred erectus. The source of seahorses coming into some of the stores in California is bycatch. So they're
It's a
getting
crapshoot.
horses from what was caught in a trolling net. Is basically the long and short. Sometimes
They're already high stress to begin with.
yeah. So not a good source for seahorses, but that's what I've discovered we have happening here, and why when I talk to fish stores, kind of what they have, you can ask for something and they'll put it on the list and it'll may or may not show up, but their source is mostly not captive bred here. It's wild caught, and it's what they end up with from their sources.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the problem is when you start looking at species such as Barbary, Hystrix, Sublongatus, even the H. combs, the stresses that they go through in that process to get to market is usually they're done for before you ever get them.
Yeah.
I don't want to say, I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine in California go directly to the wholesalers, handpick the specimens for me, and I was getting 25H Barbary at a whack. And they would arrive alive, but I couldn't keep them more than 2 weeks. And I went through about 75 Barbary and still didn't have a breeder out of those. It wasn't until I got a hold of a source that had captive specimens that I was able to start my Barbary breeding program.
And not many people can keep combs. I mean, there's a few of you guys, but they're
a little bit
like you said,
different,
it depends on where you get them from. But
I think it makes a huge difference in terms of whether you're buying captive bred, from a quality breeder versus, I would even want to buy captive bred combs that were imported.
okay, well, just an FYI real quick. I'm going to move through the next questions, but France, I don't know why I'm blurry, guys. Sorry.
I got the videos, by the way.
Oh, you do?
They're 12-second videos. So
Sure.
I don't know how I do it on this one yet.
Okay, down at the bottom, the third
Yeah, but I got
circle
I got multiple screens.
Oh, well,
But
you
what
need
I'm
them to
seeing,
me.
what I am seeing though is I am seeing fast respirations. I'm also seeing the head down move, which is not good.
Yeah.
Wait, what's the head down move?
That's where they take a posture where they're hanging kind of with their head towards the bottom.
Yeah, they kind of bob a little bit. But the thing is, there's no trigger action on it, or minimal.
I don't worry about the trigger action as much as I do the respirations. Because that's more indicative, the trigger action can be indicative of parasites in the oral cavity,
Right.
but the respirations, we're worried about the gills. And, if they're in the gills, depending upon how long they've been there, they're probably elsewhere too.
Well, I remember when years ago when we worked with Marty, and we had I acquired those combs. that had Uronema. And the thing is, one of the things I learned very quickly with them was over time, the gills, the operculum itself, if we looked at it, it would become much darker in color compared to the rest of the seahorse. And presumably that was part of the parasitic infection. But again, it just,
I hate when they're sick. Hey, Francis, I just wanted to tell you, accept my friend request. I just sent you one. And I did send you a link if you want to jump in. Or if you send the videos to me, I know how to share them if you want them shared. But that's a bummer. Go on, you guys. Any other thoughts for him?
No, I would just do what we had discussed, and fingers crossed. And the other thing is, where are we doing with temperature?
Yeah. What's the temperature of the tank? And that's the only bad thing about live, guys, is we got to wait
well,
for the
we
response.
had that discussion some time ago, so I think he's got them pretty cool.
Okay, that's. I just want to make sure they're kept cool.
Yeah, that's always one of the first things I always double check on.
Yeah. Now the thing is, in a bacterial infection, cooler temperatures will help slow down the bacterial growth.
Exactly.
And Uronema, that's really not the case. It's not going to slow down Uronema. And Uronema is really tough because they can impact cool water animals, warm water animals. Hyposalinity really does not affect Uronema. To get the salinity low enough, the animals aren't going to survive. So, you have to use some type of a therapeutic agent in order to knock it back.
The thing is with the Uronema, it actually gets into the actual internal tissues of the seahorse.
Yes.
And so they're pretty much, say, 67, 68, yeah.
Yep.
And so temperature is not going to impact it until the seahorse gets to the point where they are totally dysfunctional. And it's a very, I went through it years ago when I was given those combs. And those came out of net pen raised. And they were given to me by somebody that decided he didn't want to keep them any longer. And that was the one, Karen Smith, there in Paducah. She was the first one that lost one. And the female, the only thing that you could see that was wrong with her is she just slowly kept getting weaker and weaker and weaker.
I can't believe what Holly said. I didn't know that they were still doing that. I mean, like they're still wild caught in the stores.
Well, you're going to get some that come in, but these are a means of bycatch, not a means of them going out and collecting.
Right, and that's worse.
Well,
they're not even meant for.
Well, yeah, it is in some respect, but if they don't come to the live trade market, they're going to go to the traditional Chinese. They're going to be dried and sent for the TCM market.
Yeah, but if they're put in the live trade market, then someone like Francis gets them, and then I'm not saying I would never. I don't know why I'm so blurry, you guys. Sorry, but hey, Chimp, Happy New Year. Anyways, if I had purchased them, then I would feel like I had done something wrong or failed or did. So I'm glad we're having this conversation because obviously he's not done anything wrong.
Well, the conditions alone at the store indicate a problem.
Yeah.
And
why can't we put these stores out of business? No, sorry.
Well, here's the thing. If you want to get the stores, well, part of it, but when you're dealing with a store that's not doing things correctly and you see a seahorse that's being improperly kept or one that you're going to try to rescue, don't. Yeah. And the reason I say don't is because that just encourages the store to repeat the process.
More.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the best thing to do is to walk away entirely. And yeah, it sucks for that animal, but I promise you, if you take that animal, they're going to say there'll be another sucker come along and they'll order some more.
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
so it's so hard to walk away from them.
Stores here won't have seahorses because they can't keep them alive. They tell me.
That's
when
right.
I'm offering, the captive bred to local fish stores. Most of them in my area won't take them. They'll put up my flyer and refer people to me, but they won't offer them or take them from me because they can't keep them. They don't have the right conditions as far as temperature and tanks. They
They
usually
won't
have
set
all
up
their
a
tanks
standalone
on
system.
one system. Most
Yep.
saltwater fish are tropical, so they're keeping their tanks at 80 degrees, 78 degrees. So they're just not set up for the seahorses. And if
Exactly.
they're a responsible store, they'll tell you that.
Now,
Well-
I can tell you that I've had many stores who have contacted me because I used to sell wholesale as well. And, I had stores that, as you guys had mentioned, they just give up on keeping seahorses. But I've also had stores that were asking what they needed to do it correctly so they could. They recognized the market. And I took some stores that were, I want to say conditions were rather atrocious on what they were doing. And they turned it around to where they were very successful keeping and selling seahorses. So, it's
Yeah.
up to the individual store if they want to put the resources into having it. Stores that have been successful with it, it becomes a big hit because it's such an attractive thing. People come
Yeah.
into the store just to look at the seahorses.
Seahorses.
And as a retailer, you want foot traffic.
Yeah. I've
I know
got
me
one
and
store.
Cheryl. Oh, go ahead.
San Antonio is a big city. There is one store in San Antonio that I will provide with seahorses.
What's his name? Not the store name, but
It's,
the individual.
it's Aquarium Design.
Yeah, I used to sell to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they have a seahorse system set up on its own sump, completely separate from everything else. And the person that works there, when I was working with combs, she was just started out and trying to make her way raising combs.
Oh,
And so she's a long-term org member. And of course, has read everything she can get her
Well,
hands on.
the two guys from that store were very good in terms of being easy to deal with. They had the right attitudes.
Yeah.
Everything I liked about them, I enjoyed dealing with them.
well,
They're great people to work with. And you go in there and they're always trying to help people out.
it sounds like that's another thing that should go into into our first question, Dan, is what to look for when you walk into a store. Not only the questions to ask, but to see if the seahorses are on a separate system.
Well,
And I
just
know
because-
Cheryl and I have talked endlessly about how hard it is to sell the seahorses. Mine much fewer than hers, but sell the seahorses to stores because they don't want to set up separate systems.
it doesn't always have to be a separate system. I would prefer it, but it doesn't always have to be. I've had many stores be successful, but there's multiple things that come into play. And that's why some of the questions I asked about temperature and whether they're doing prophylactic treatment, there's a lot of stores that have copper running in their systems with the fish just as a prophylactic measure. A lot of stores are much warmer than I like to see. And, I have reef friends that actually keep their reef tanks much cooler than what you'll see in the stores.
Mm-hmm.
It
It's
makes,
growth. They want them to grow.
Yep.
Coral. Sorry.
but
No, I go ahead.
but if you look and you see, if I walked into a store and I was looking for seahorses, and as I walked past the tanks, I saw dead fish in tanks, I probably would not do it. Just
Or a
based on
tank
that.
with the lights completely off. No.
I would be looking at the animals to see how they were in the tank, whether they were active. Now, just because they're not active doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but I'd be looking for activity. I'd be wanting to see them feed them. And you have to remember that some of the ailments that seahorses get is what I call the delayed effect. You walk into a store, everything looks honky-dory. You go home, and 2 weeks later, you lose a seahorse, and you go, what did I do wrong? Well, they were already predestined because they were already exposed to something.
Yeah.
And it just took time for that to transition into developing to where it began its problem. There are some stores, by reputation are very good, and there are some stores by reputation that aren't. And I would put a lot of credence into that. Because and you can also get a very good sense just by dealing with the people in there on if they're knowledgeable or if they care. I mean, just the attitude alone. If it's
like the store. Yeah, it was like the store I walked into that was selling basically barely above fry level erectus as dwarf seahorses.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And it's one thing for me to tell them that those are not dwarf seahorses. It's another thing entirely for them to listen and make the necessary changes.
I got to give a shout out real quick for the reef in Indianapolis, Indiana, because I did sell them captive bred seahorses. They were very attentive. They wanted to know, the girl there is now like a crazy seahorse expert because she did the standalone system. So they're great. But yeah, I would definitely, and I love the thought that Dan put in about that many places pre-treat their fish, and this isn't just for seahorses, guys. You should always ask if they've got them running on any kind of medications or if they're prophylactically
Well,
treating, because that you bring them home. I remember someone on Wine Wednesday previously, I can't remember who, but someone told a story about this guy who had the most amazing fish and they were great, but he had this special system where he was treating them with certain things constantly, and it kept them healthy. And this wasn't seahorses, but kept them healthy, kept them great. But he would actually tell the people, all right, if you want to buy these fish, you've got to do this because this is what they're used to. And I just wish all stores would do that. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Well, it's like with me when I talk with people that are brand new. I go through the temperature. I love the question. Can I put seahorses in my sump on my reef? No. The reason being, first and foremost, it's too warm. Secondly, you're going to lose any beauty of being able to see them. And who knows what's in your tank from everything else you've brought in there.
Yep. We've got two other questions that aren't related, but Dan, what was I going to ask? Oh gosh. Didn't you have a customer that did keep seahorses in a sump well?
Well, yeah, but you got to
It was
understand,
huge.
you have to define sump, because
Right.
in this case, the sump was 125 gallon standalone
Right.
aquarium.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
different.
So, when I say sump, I usually think of a small compartment underneath the tank, and that's not adequate. And,
Yeah.
the argument in a live fish store is, well, they don't move around much. They don't need a lot of room. And, well, they don't move around a lot because, take the world's top athlete, lock him in a 40 square foot bathroom for 6 months and see how much movement he does.
Right.
If you're locked up in a small compartment, you're not going to be very active.
Yeah.
I was just teasing
You
with
got
Cheryl.
somebody trying to beat down your door every time you start to go outside, like a clownfish will do to a seahorse. You're not going to go anywhere.
Well, again, folks, if your question didn't get answered to the length you'd like, put it in the comment section. Go into Seahorse Sources group for sure. I do want to get these last two questions in, but Francis, please keep us updated. Let us know how this works out. I will type up and put all of the information in the comment section when we're done. But let's get these two final questions answered. Are there any, and this was Francis also, are there laws and
Francis is wonderful at asking questions.
good? I love it. Please come and ask
I'm
questions.
serious.
This makes the Wine Wednesday more enjoyable than it's
This
just
person
chit-chatting
is
about
going to
our
be
stuff.
a great seahorse keeper.
Yes, I agree. Okay, are there laws and or regulations that restrict those purposefully creating a backyard breeding of certain species of seahorses from overseas besides CITES too?
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a great question. First of all, CITES has nothing to do with breeding the seahorses. CITES is a law in place to restrict the trade of seahorses because they're quote unquote endangered, which one could argue about different species on the status, but that's a whole different argument. As far as the breeding goes, it's going to vary from state to state. For example, in Florida, you have to have an aquaculture license if you're going to do any breeding, and that doesn't matter if you're a commercial facility or not. If you're a hobbyist that wants to sell something you bred, you need to have an aquaculture license and you're state inspected. It's an easy thing to get. It's $100 and it's easy on the inspections. They come in and make sure you're not doing anything stupid and let you be. They're there to help you, as opposed to many other agencies which seem to try to knock you out of place. There are some other states that require having a aquaculture permit or license. Most do not. So, the other thing that happens is that you have to be cognizant of shipping. In Florida, if you're caught shipping seahorses without having an aquaculture permit or a reseller's permit, you're in big trouble. I can't account for all the other states, but that's what you need to look into.
Yeah, but real quick, Dan, because I'm in Indiana, and when I was trying to set up the website, I did called every place I could think of. They kept directing me different places because nobody knew, and I finally found out in my state you don't have to have anything.
Right.
They
You
don't.
don't in
it-
California
but,
either.
but but wait, my question is, if I shipped to Florida, would I then be in trouble?
No,
No,
Okay,
no. But if your shipment originated in Florida, it would have to meet
gotcha.
the Florida guidelines.
exactly. See, in
Okay.
Texas, you have the option of getting an aquaculture license or not. They're
Hmm.
not regulating it.
Gotcha.
If
Well,
Florida got so bad at one time that during one of the conferences, they were going around busting people for selling aquatic animals without a permit. And they were actually chasing down people on Craigslist. You know, somebody would decided to, you know, they got a fish that got too big for their aquarium, so they're trying to sell or give it away. And without an aquaculture permit, they got fined.
Oh,
wow.
geez.
Well, but that's also because it's your backyard. I mean, you can go
Yeah.
collect them, and they don't want that.
Well,
I mean,
it is,
I get it.
but also Florida does more aquaculture than any other state.
Right.
Mhm. It's a way to make money for the
It
state.
is, but it's also, you know, part of its regulation. Florida has huge problems with exotic species.
Oh.
Yes, they do.
Pythons,
I could see that.
lionfish, all kinds of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think that answered it. And you know what? I just realized
Mhm.
is okay. I'm gonna have to hide this and then put it up because I can't read the whole thing while it's up. Okay. I have a hypothetical scenario. If a new seahorse owner is starting to question the validity of the ethical nature of their seahorse purchase due to the multiple variants of the label captive bred, and through following up with the local business owner with due diligence and precaution and a major seahorse business, I won't name it, it seems the history of the pair may either be a wild-caught pair or a backyard breeding program. What would be the right steps? Sorry, trying to scroll. What would be the right steps to take? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't understand what the ultimately the question is in terms of the right step. Are you know, are we trying to say not to purchase or to report, or you know, my, if it was a case, let's go back up to the first part of it, the captive bred label. There's several different terms that are used. There is no set quote unquote standard, whether it's captive bred, tank raised, and you can get technical and twist these things around 6 ways from Sunday. A true captive bred program is a program that is bred in captivity, and the animals that are sold were bred in captivity, period. Tank raised can be either captive bred or wild, being raised in a tank. The two are often interchanged back and forth. Um, whether it's a backyard breeder or whether it's a quote unquote legitimate business such as Seahorse Australia, if they're captive bred, you know, they're captive bred. Some are going to do better than others. There's commercial breeders that aren't that great. There's you know, backyard breeders that aren't that great, and the reverse is true. There's backyard breeders who have an excellent reputation. Excuse me.
You
And
sound you
yeah, I'm clogged up. And as a consequence, you know, getting animals from them is a very good thing. Um, so I don't have a problem necessarily with backyard breeders, provided, you know, I have some indication that they're quality specimens. Um, I don't know what
But
step.
can you report? Can you report? Can you do anything? Like, what if, like, seriously, if a store's selling captive bred and they're not captive bred, there's nothing we can do, is there?
Well, no, not really. I mean, the only recourse you have is to use the legal system and sue them. And I, I, I really don't see how that's going to really accomplish much.
Right.
You know, it's The
So
best
just
thing,
don't buy them, and
yeah,
then don't
the
buy
best,
them.
yeah, the smartest thing to do is just not to reward them with the purchase.
Yeah. But it's like I tell people, buy from a well-known, reputable breeder that you
Mhm.
know is honorable in
Yep.
terms of what they're selling.
Yeah, all the way around. A good reputable breeder is going to have, I mean, you can go back and look at our reputation over the years and try to find some bad marks. And, we were very keen on keeping our reputation spotless. And,
Yeah.
there are people like that. There's other people who don't care. And, you
Mhm.
know, um, there's some that will go above and beyond to make sure you're happy. And there's some that says once you purchased it, you're on your own.
Yeah.
So,
So check their guarantees, check their
Well,
votes, not votes. What's it
I,
called?
I think
Their
their reputation is more important than
reputation.
anything that's written,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you can have somebody that offers this as a guarantee, but that doesn't mean you're getting a good specimen.
right. But
I mean,
but
if you're,
as he said, there are good backyard breeders. I
yes, there
mean,
are.
come on.
It
yeah.
Go ahead.
captive bred is rare here. There's only the only two big ones that I know of are Alyssa's Seahorse Savvy and Ocean Rider out of Hawaii. And then there's people like myself that are hobbyists, that my seahorses have fry. I raise them and then I from homes. But you're not going to find them much, at least here in California, from what I found in the stores.
Well,
Well,
Here
I have
where I
what,
live, it's very rare to find seahorses that are captive bred.
what I can tell you though is that often people get confused and people assume that they're wild caught when sometimes they're not. And a good example of that is that there's a couple of breeders that do not sell retail; they only sell commercial, wholesale.
Mhm.
And
Wholesale.
one of them is does not train them to eat frozen foods. Their primary production is artemia, and because they have so much artemia, that's the food they feed the seahorses. And so when they sell them to, whether they selling them to a distributor or to a retail store, these animals are not trained to frozen. They are true captive bred, but they've been fed live foods their entire life.
Right.
Mhm.
The best indication for seeing whether it's captive bred or whether it's wild caught, first is the species. When you start seeing things such as hystrix and combs showing up,
Mhm.
there's not many people out there breeding to know, ORA at one time was producing combs, but I don't know if they still are or not. Um, but if they're not readily available on the captive bred market, they're probably not captive bred. And the other thing is size. If somebody is selling erectus that are, 3 to 4 inches in length, and you're going, well, these captive or not, odds are they are. Most of your wild caught specimens are going to be larger.
Right. No, that makes sense. And
yeah.
Maria said, my seahorses from a store and recently found out they only use one local seahorse breeder for their seahorses and they have their own standalone tank in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Cheers. Awesome. And then
The
she
thing is, that
said,
there's good hobbyist breeders out there, and there are people that really know and work at it. The thing is,
and
the
they're all in
hardest part
Seahorse
is
Sources
light.
group.
The hardest part is finding people then that you have to work with people and help educate them during the process. And it's not about selling seahorses; it's about trying to find a way to make them successful with seahorses.
Okay, so guys, I'm not trying to push us forward, but Kelly's getting to the point where the fever's kicking in. So we got a few more questions. And plus, I promised Dan not over 2 hours. All right. So Maria also said, I have an unrelated question as well. Recently, my seahorse has been freaking out if I do anything, clean the leftover food, turn off the light, etc. And he's actually hitting his head on rocks.
Okay.
Thoughts?
Well, the, it sounds like the seahorse is stressed, number one. The light problem is, I've seen that many times in the past, and it can be a little bit tricky because most lights either are on or off.
Mhm.
And what I would probably do is try to brighten up the room before I turn the lights off on the tank so there's less of a dramatic change, and then try to gradually lower the lighting until he gets used to it. Um, the siphoning of the food, I think it's the a matter of the seahorse getting used to the foreign object coming in the tank and doing something. And that's going to take time to settle down.
I'm really curious, Maria. Is this a new seahorse? Because his answers were all correct if it's a brand new seahorse, but if this is a seahorse you've had for a while, that's something different altogether. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to say one thing that might help too is if you put a little night light in near the tank. So when you turn up the main light, if it still had some light, it might help the seahorse settle down more instead of acting crazy.
I've noticed that in my tank because I do have a light on my grow out tank that switches from a regular shop light to a black light. And what I try to do is unplug the shop light while the ambient daylight is still out. So it's a gradual decrease in lighting before their other light comes on. Because, yeah, I've noticed that when they have a immediate change in lighting, they kind of freak out about it.
Yeah, it depends on how pronounced it is. That's why I say something like a little night light could ease the transition. It would
Or
probably
like
be-
dim lighting, like I have in the room right now. You know, if
Yeah.
there's some other light when the main light goes out, so they're not going from bright light to pitch black.
Exactly.
Sure.
Exact-
And I would say too that I had a seahorse actually the first time my first male was pregnant. He actually aborted his fry because I put a new light on the tank and it was just too bright. So maybe mess with the parameters of the lighting, like not parameters, maybe dim it, as they were saying, like the light overall, depending on like as with all questions, unfortunately, it's better if we can ask more questions of you to answer it because it depends on how your tank's set up, what the lighting actually is, what kind of light you're using.
Sure.
But the hitting his head on rocks, guys, Dan, you said
Yeah.
you've seen that?
Well, they go into a jerking motion sometimes when you turn the lights out or turn them on suddenly.
I've never seen that.
Oh, I have many
Wow.
times.
I have seen it.
Even within the facility, I've seen it, and I've had people that have asked about it. She said on here she's had them for about 2 months, and
Thank you.
I would say it. You know, sometimes animals get used to things real quickly. Sometimes it takes a longer period of time, and there are some that just never ever adapt. I would say I would give him more time to adapt. The suctioning, the cleaning needs to be done, so I would continue to do that, and you know, maybe try to slow down the motions of what you're doing when you're doing it to see if that might help. But I would still clean the tank and hope he gets used to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually, like when we talk about weaning and stuff, which we will in part 2 and 3, keep mentioning it. But when we talk about weaning fry, it's all about tough love. But I've just, thank you guys for being here because I've never seen a seahorse hit its head on rocks. I understand why you're freaked out, Maria. And she also said, and I'd also be curious what your suction device is because I use a turkey baster. So if there's a new device out there, I want to know what it is, please. And he also killed the clown. Oh my god, the seahorse killed the clown. Is that what you're saying? Holy moly! You got a stallion.
Their own personality, and you know that I have seahorses. I have some that will actually throw a dramatic fit when I'm cleaning
sure.
the tank, and others that don't. They get used to the siphoning, but I have some that I swear they're just drama queens. You know, and
Yeah.
they'll I'll move because when I'm siphoning, I'll move the decorations from one side of the tank to the other. And I have ones that they
I
do
can't.
this.
I can't get mine to let go of the
For a
decorations.
year, and when I move the decorations, they will go. I have two females, especially that do this. They will go to the place where that decoration was sitting and throw themselves on the ground and writhe and throw a fit. And they're fine. They get up. But they're angry or whatever that I moved their favorite coral to the other side of the tank while I was cleaning. And this might happen every week when I do the siphon. So you kind of watch it, and then the longer you have them, you get used to their personalities. And it might be a problem that they have. It might take time to figure out, or it might be that it's just part of their personality.
Well, and I personally had to set up a bachelor pad for my 3 very mean male seahorses. So I agree with the personality thing. But Maria also said, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I'm reading what she says too, but
Yeah, go ahead.
the thing I want to point out here is that it's highly unusual for a seahorse to be aggressive enough to kill another fish. And over the years, I've only known of a couple instances where we've had seahorses that exhibited this type of behavior. And I think it's important to point out that if she adds another seahorse to the tank, make darn sure it's a female.
Yes.
Because I myself have had to separate one seahorse that was so aggressive that it was just attacking everything in the tank. And I've had a customer who had the same experience, and it could cohabitate with a single female, but that was it.
Maybe he needs laid. Okay.
Maybe, but I'd be real concerned if I added another male to that tank, the results.
Like beta fish, however you say
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nope.
Yeah.
But no, I think I when I read that he's alone because you only got one, that's what I would do. If it were me, I'm not giving you professional advice, but if it were me, I would seek out a female. And they do seem aggressive, especially with an aggressive male. He's going to be aggressive with the female. Get you a strong female if you can do that. But I can't believe a seahorse killed a clownfish. That just sounds insane to me.
Wow.
So there's some that are just that aggressive, Dan? Wow.
Yeah, it's rare. It's very rare. But
how would they even kill the clownfish?
suction? They snick them.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I've seen them snick each other.
I have seen.
Well, I've seen them snick
Mark.
each other, yeah, but never hard enough to hurt
I've seen
somebody.
Mark on
No,
another fish.
I've noted seahorses taking out another seahorse's eye with a snick.
Oh,
Wow.
And her question is, should she get a grown female? And my answer is yes, if possible.
Mhm.
And that's not going to be an easy thing to do.
Wow.
But the larger the
Marie-
female, the better.
Maria, if you videotaped your seahorse chasing down a clownfish and snicking him to death, as gross as that sounds, I want to see it. Please send it to me. Because
I have
holy
one.
moly.
I had an extremely large male that I got years and years ago as an adult. And the female he paired up with was one that I raised. And I'll tell you what, she couldn't look at another male or he'd nail her happy buns.
Wow.
I am quite serious. If she would start looking at another male or showing any kind of flirting, he would grab her and pin her to the substrate.
Jeez. See, that's my bachelor pad had 3 males. I had 3 males that like they would fight over women, they would fight over anything. And if you've never seen a seahorse fight, they can fight. I mean, they'll wrap each other and take each other down and wrestle like crazy and snick. And I can't believe the eyeball thing and the clown thing, but I've seen them fight each other. And I put these 3 males in a tank by themselves. Believe it or not, they went to their corners and they lived happily ever after. It was insane.
It's rare to see captive bred specimens do that because they're raised in an environment where there's so many other seahorses. But if you take a large male out of the wild and put him in a tank, sometimes they can be downright aggressive.
Yeah,
that's what I would be curious. You said you got him, Maria, from a store. I'm wondering if maybe he's not a wild caught. Which congratulations for doing so well with him. Obviously, he's going to fight through no matter what. But I believe that
part of the freaking out with the siphon too is because he's a badass.
He's a badass, and you're probably a threat to him too. You know,
my favorite one though, I raised several combs. They were all in a 65 together, and the pair was forming. They were dancing together. Everything was looking great. And here comes a smaller male, and he's trying to get in between the two of them. But guess who put him on the ground? And it wasn't the other male, it was the female that pinned him to
Dang.
the substrate. I've never seen that before or since.
Right. And she said he's entertaining. I'm just worried he's going to hurt himself. Maria, are you in Seahorse Sources group? Because, post a video, let us know, or come back next week and jump in the chat. I'll give you the link and show us a video. None of my bachelor pad males ever hurt themselves. They were very careful to hurt others. But
yeah, I haven't seen that. I've seen mine.
wait, Holly, real quick.
But they don't seem to hurt themselves. I'd be interested to actually see it. How hard are they hitting themselves?
So Maria, wait, guys, 1 second. Maria, that's your formal invitation to come next week. Message me on Facebook, Kelly Dealvern, and we'll get you in here next week to show your videos, and we'll talk about dominant males. But I'm giving everybody the 5-minute warning. We're over 2 hours. I feel like crap. I know Dan's got to go. So love you all, but we'll continue this next week. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to say, you want to watch a fight, get 2 large adult male engines together.
Ooh, I bet.
Because they have a big bony plate in front of their coronet, and they'll sit there and ram together.
Hey, Holly, did you have anything you wanted to talk about this week? Because I know, how's thing 2? What's going on?
Thing 2 is back in the hospital tank because he started getting floaty again. I've been watching him real close because I was kind of afraid of that, because the thing about, I'm pretty sure what he's got going on, I'm pretty positive it's a bacterial infection, and it's internal, so I can't always see it. So when he was better, and I was working in the hospital for over 2 months with antibiotics, and I was getting worried about overdosing antibiotics, having him in there for too long. So spent 10 days out of the hospital back, with his siblings, and was improving, but I started noticing him starting to get a little floaty again. So I put him back in the hospital. He's not floating anymore. He's over that. 2 days of Diamox took care of that. He's on antibiotics again, and he's going to be in there with antibiotics for the foreseeable future, because last time I gave him an extra 10 days on antibiotics past the time I saw the improvement. So he's
Hey, Dan, wait. Hey, Dan. Wait, hang on.
Hang on,
Holly, hang on 1 second. I just wanted to ask Dan, because you haven't been privy to all of this, and Cheryl and Ray and everybody has been helping her, and I know you have in the group, but so how many times can you treat a seahorse with antibiotics? Because as you just heard, she treated him, she thought he was a done for, and then he got better. She put him back, and now she's treating him again. What else can she do?
Keep in mind, though, he also has a severe wound that is still very open, and he's probably going to be losing part of his tail. I don't think that tail will ever heal. So he's still got an ongoing bacterial problem there.
Well, my thoughts are not what people want to hear. Based on the history, if it was me, even as a hobbyist, I would put the animal down and move on.
But she was going to, though, but he got better.
I know, but here's the thing. When you're dealing with this type of a thing where you have the ebb and flow of it getting better and then reversing and getting worse again, better, worse, better, worse, after multiple treatments, you can keep treating as long as the animals survive. But you're dealing with either a form of bacteria that is antibiotic resistant, or you're dealing with mycobacteria or one of the other acid-fast bacterias. And quite often, what happens in that setting is they temporarily seem to get better, but it doesn't kill the infection. It just reduces the numbers. And you can go like this for eternity treating them with no success. And that's why I say it's, you know, I'm not opposed to treating a seahorse. You know, I know in a home setting, most people are going to do stuff that I wouldn't do as a commercial breeder, where you're, I don't want to say we're more cold-hearted, but it's, we have too much to lose to do it any other way.
Yeah.
But there's a point of no, there's a point at which I think it's not worth continuing, and I think you run the risk of it spreading elsewhere. That I would, unfortunately, I would do the hard thing.
Okay, and I want Holly to continue, but Dan, I'm just curious, have you, or do you know of anyone who has successfully cured a seahorse of internal GBD? And
Yeah.
and
Oh
or
yeah.
external, because pouch emphysema, the seahorses that I've had that had pouch emphysema, they just kept getting it.
No,
Which
many
means
times.
there's something
No,
wrong with
we've
the
had
strain.
high degree of success. What I haven't had is when you have a prolonged treatment. You know, I've seen people treat, for example, tail rot for 4 to 6 weeks, and the eventual outcome was good. But when you're dealing with an internal infection and they're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and you've done more than 3 treatments, I think the prognosis is pretty bad. And you know, I hate to be this way, but I'm sometimes blunt about it, but it's the reality of what is. And
Well, he's still got a large wound on basically
Holly,
in the middle of his pouch and on his tail.
Holly, are you using the Alimax on the wounds?
I did for 10 days. What I did was I had him in antibiotics.
Yep.
He was in that for 54 days. So close, about 2 months. And then after that, I started using the topical. I used both Alamax and Aladerm. What I would do is I would put the Alamax liquid on the wounds and dry it, blow it a little bit, and then put the Aladerm over that, hoping it might help seal that inside, you know, and blow on him again and release him. When he's in the antibiotics, he's back in the antibiotics now. I don't treat him topically. So he's in Sulfaplex and Canaplex now.
If you're going to continue treating him in there anyway. Now, the reason for that is that Allison, in addition to killing bacteria, lowers antibiotic resistance. So you're going to be more effective with the antibiotics by doing that in conjunction with the antibiotics.
So continue the Alamax and Aladerm with his antibiotics. Okay.
Yes. You'll see a better chance of that particular part healing. Unfortunately, we can't, you know, I think that the dosing for treating him internally with Allison is not good, because the seahorses, garlic is not something we should be feeding them, and the dosing required to be effective, I think, would do the seahorse in terms of feeding him Alamax. There's a way of doing that, but it's I don't.
You know, I
outcome,
haven't been feeding him garlic or B12 at all. He has appetite, even in the Diamox he's eating. So I haven't been worried about his appetite.
No, I'm just trying to think about how to get something inside to help turn.
To treat,
you know,
inside.
What are you feeding him?
Right now, he's on frozen. During his first treatment, I happened to have live adult brine shrimp on hand, which I no longer have. And so I was enriching the adult brine shrimp and adding them to the hospital tank, so they were able to absorb, you know, some of the antibiotics, and he was eating those. But I don't have those anymore. I only have the frozen mysis, and I have amphipods. But when I had him in the hospital before, I added a few, and he had no interest in the amphipods. What's not familiar with them, probably.
If you can get a hold of some stabilized vitamin C, it's called Stay C, I believe. You're gonna have to do some searching around, but there's actually a stabilized form of vitamin C out there.
Uh-huh.
And I would take that and I would coat his food with that and give that to him. Vitamin C in higher doses can help fight antibiotic resistance.
Literally,
Um,
Dan told me to do this for myself. So go ahead. Sorry.
Was it
um,
Stacy spelled like stay?
yep,
STAY?
yep. And then the letter C.
Okay.
I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I was trying to do a quick Google, but I'm not coming up with it. I used to use it as part of my, I used to put it in the Dan's feed. But it's
Mhm.
cool because it's a stabilized form and the water doesn't instantly destroy it like most vitamin C. The other thing that, in this particular case, you have nothing to lose, but I'd be real curious to see the results of maybe using molecular hydrogen in conjunction with the antibiotics.
I remember you talking about that before.
Is that something she can actually do?
Yeah, it's not cheap. A bottle of molecular hydrogen in a tablet form is going to run about $50.
Mhm.
And
I've seen that. I remember you talking about it before, and I looked it up for people reasons.
yep.
But
We need to do a GoFundMe. Anyways, go ahead, Holly. Sorry.
The problem is that I've never been able to ascertain the dose that was effective, so I don't know. But
Mhm.
do you have him in a 10-gallon tank?
He's in a 10-gallon.
Yeah, I would be inclined to put one tablet in there a day and see what happens.
At what milligram? Are they all the same when you buy it,
Pretty
or
much,
what?
pretty much. If you, the one that I was getting, oh, let me look here real quick. I'll tell you which
Look,
one.
Holly's going to end up figuring out the cure to GBD internal.
No, I don't know. But he's different than, I had one seahorse that had it before that didn't make it. But
Yep.
he's
So
different in the way that he's a fighter. He's eating, he's he wants to live, so I
Yep.
want to help him.
yeah,
Yes.
the one that I'm, there's different. You have to remember when you're buying supplements, you have different companies and different quality of different supplements, even though they're considered the same thing. And according to what I found, the Quicksilver Scientific H2 Elite tablets, I've tried a couple different ones. I've had better results with this one. And essentially, the tablets, you drop it in water and it fizzes. And in the process of doing that, it adds hydrogen to the water.
Nice. Quicksilver Scientific, and what was the rest?
H2 Elite tablets.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, it's on Amazon. And again, it runs about $50.
Gotcha. I think I may have even put them on one of my lists to keep track of them. So yeah, I'll look that up. And
Well, if you need some help, Holly, message me because I want to see you succeed. We need Thing 2 to live. I know Dan had good
he
advice.
surprised me. No, I thought I was going to lose him from the first,
I know.
and I haven't. So I'm like, you know what? I'll do what I can for him, and just that's the best I can do is see what happens.
One of the few projects that I never got to doing that I really wanted to attempt was to work with this and see what the results were. There's some promise to it, but unfortunately, we don't have anybody with enough experience to really guide us on the starting phases of it. And I really wish I knew the dosing.
Well, see, now if we help Holly do it, then she can work with you, Dan, and we can figure it out. I love it.
So this worked or this didn't work. But it's
real
one patient.
Holly, did I cut you off, or did you have anything else you wanted to talk about? Because I want to really quickly. Francis sent me the videos, show them, and then we gotta cut it. It's over 2 hours now.
No, everybody else is doing great. The only thing I was going to mention, because somebody earlier brought up, that their seahorses were playing but not breeding. I have that going on in the grow out tank, and I found dumped eggs twice. They're just over a year old now. There's 8 of them in that tank, and I see them doing the courting behavior, but nobody's really dancing other than thing too, interesting, the one who's in the hospital was the only male seahorse that knew how to dance, that would actually, rise up with the females, when he was in there. And nobody else wants to swim like that.
Some people
So
just aren't into
what's the
foreplay.
take on that?
Dan.
What's that, Dan? What'd you
Yeah,
say?
well,
I missed it.
he said some seahorses aren't into foreplay, and I can tell you, ain't no seahorse male getting anywhere. Anyways, go ahead. Well, I think everybody said a good amount about that. I mean, just don't worry about it. They're on their
Yeah.
own time. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? You can try the lighting and temperature thing, but they're good. It's usually that people can't stop seahorses from breeding.
Well,
So
the other thing is, if you've got more than one pair in a tank, sometimes the interference will shorten up that mating. If you really want to see a good mating, with the whole display, it's better to have a single pair in a tank.
And I've got 2 males and 6 females in that tank.
yep, and
Probably a lot of stress on the boys.
well, and there's there, as Cheryl said earlier, there's competition. Oh wait, I think I have Cheryl muted. I'm sorry, Cheryl, but there, there's a lot of competition. So if you're really trying to become like a huge breeder or something, maybe get another tank to Dan that asked the question, and put them in separate tanks. That's how commercial breeders do it. They find a pair and then they put them in their own tank and they condition the hell out of them, which we'll cover in part 2 and 3. But yeah, that would pretty much be it. You guys, let me show Francis's video really quick, and then we'll do final comments. Oh yeah, I got a screen share, don't I? All right, here we go. Let's see if I can do all of them real quick. And this is just in case you were wondering what Dan was talking about earlier. All right, so can you guys see this playing now? His breaths. And then sorry, I'm not very good at the sharing thing, but oh yeah, the downward. That's what you meant by the down.
Yep. The head down posture.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about.
Oh.
That's not always indicative of a problem, but a lot of times with a sick seahorse, you'll see them take that posture as they start deteriorating.
And he's so pretty.
Beautiful color, black and gold.
He does look pissed off, though. He does not look happy.
This looks
Dan,
like
is that a lot of, is that over breathing? That looks normal to me.
The other picture, I think it was, I thought he was breathing faster.
Okay, but this is not. Really?
Actually, for sitting there not doing anything, I think it's still a little fast.
Oh yeah, I guess you're right. Okay. Well, I think that was the last one. Francis, we're on your side, and we will continue to hope. And please come back and let us know how things go. And don't give up on seahorses, because you tried to rescue these guys apparently from a bad situation. And while I would do the same thing, we've all talked tonight about how it's just supporting the people that sell them. And yeah, I guess that's all I got. But okay, guys, last comments, because I gotta go. My kids are driving me nuts now in the background. But I love everyone that comes to Wine Wednesday. Thank you so much. What, Cheryl?
You forgot to pick them up last week.
Oh yeah, I know. But anyways, Dan, especially you, because these lovely ladies come with me every week, but I know you're super busy, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. We will post and announce when we're going to do part 2 and 3, which will be much more detailed for you people that have kept seahorses longer and want questions about medications and probiotics and breeding and fry. We're going to cover all of that in part 2 and 3. We just didn't want to try to pack it into one night. Look at this. We did the basics and we took 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Go ahead, Cheryl.
One quick question. We are no longer able to get Furantum.
That's in the medications video. Go ahead.
FDA is pulling it. What would be your recommendation to replace Furan 2?
There's not many choices.
I know.
So kanamycin and triple sulfur would be my go-to.
Okay, that's what I've been thinking.
Yeah,
That's what I've advised so
and
far, but I wanted to be sure I was right.
I would combine the two.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
if you look at CChem's dosing, they no longer have the actual dosing of how much is what. But if you were to look at Noga's book, Fish
Hmm.
Disease Diagnosis and Treatment, his recommendation for the dose of kanamycin is equivalent to 1 whole tube of the Canaplex.
Jeez.
Okay,
Wow.
they used to have the actual amounts. I was able to look them up, but and when you combine the two, you have the synergistic effect, and it doesn't
Right.
take as much. So when you look at somebody like Basler's book, you can
Mhm.
deduce that you can go much lower in the dosing by combining the two. So the other thing is that it's still in the same family as neomycin, so I don't want to go with high doses anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Because
Because
yeah, we
the
had a lot of problems when we were using neomycin.
Yep.
it affected their what, liver?
Renal system.
Renal system. And guys, Cheryl's breaking the rules because that will be part of part 2 when we discuss medications. So
Sorry. No,
no, you're fine.
people are always asking me these questions,
I
and I
know.
want this was my opportunity without bugging him when he's at home to
Cheryl, I'm teasing you.
get some of the information I wanted to be sure that I was correct on.
I'm
So
teasing you.
real quick,
You're just
can I
go ahead,
jump
Holly.
in with a suggestion for a question for next week? Kind of based on that, I'd kind of like to know what human antibiotics, like we give Diamox to seahorses for things, what human antibiotics are relatable since they're taking the fish antibiotics off the market,
Well,
and we might be going
a
forward
lot of
with
the fish antibiotics are the same as the antibiotics we have for humans. The problem is,
that's what I'm thinking.
right, but the problem is that we're dealing with a saltwater environment, and the salts affect the antibiotics. So,
Mm.
in the freshwater world, you'd have a bigger selection, but in the
Mm.
saltwater world, many of those simply don't work in the saltwater environment, or you have to go with such high doses to overcome that. Now, if you're giving injectables, it's a different story. There are some injectable antibiotics out there that are very effective, but you have to have, number one, a means of getting them, which usually requires a prescription. And number
Mhm.
two, it requires somebody to know how
Being ready
to
to inject them? Oh my
to
God.
inject them.
That's common
If
in
you
the
watch
UK.
if you look over in the UK and Europe, that's very common. And
Wow.
Hmm.
it's and I don't know if nitrofurazone is being taken off of the retail sales market, but I don't know for sure that it's actually unavailable. So it
Mm.
might be possible to obtain by prescription from some source. I don't know. I haven't looked into it.
Well, there's been a couple other companies that are putting out a nitrofurazone, but I don't know whether that's I haven't had time to do enough research to just figure out if it's got other additives in it or what's going on with it.
Well,
Well,
we're going to do the research before part 2. But go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
that would be worth looking into because Furon 2 is actually a mixture of a couple of different
Right.
nitrofurans. But, I've used plain nitrofurazone before with success. And, it's, I'll have to do some digging and see. There's a couple sources I know that we might be able to find. It won't be order on Amazon. It's going to have to order and have to wait on it to come in. But people that want to be ahead of the curve might be able to get it.
Yeah.
And final thing I want to say, guys, is that I didn't mean to mislead. Part 2 and 3 won't be next week and the week after because Dan has a life and works and
No, he
etc.
does. This is his life.
But we will post
Used to
when
be.
part 2 and 3 will be live. And again, if you have any questions that weren't answered, all you have to do is put them in the comment section. I will make sure that not just I, but I get Dan to answer them. I have his home phone number, so I get to bug him. But anyways, we will cover medications, breeding, all of that stuff in part 2 and 3. Make sure you're subscribed so you know when they come out and watch for the posts. All right, you guys, I'm going to have to call it, but anything else?
Dan, thank
know I
you,
cut
and
you
it's
off.
great to see you.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Thanks
hope
for
you're
having me.
healthy. Oh, real quick side note. Francis tried to get chloroquine phosphate, and the vet refused to give it to him. And I suspect it's partly due to COVID with people that were using chloroquine phosphate to treat themselves.
Mm.
That is probably true, and I wouldn't doubt that for a minute. But yeah, and ordering it from overseas is going to take a long time.
Well, and Dan has talked about in previous Wine Wednesdays about how, in the feed store, he has people come in trying to get antibiotics and stuff for wives and stuff that have problems, but they don't know the correct dosing. So it's kind of, we really need to do the research first and not just say to use human stuff for animals without whatever. And the chloroquine phosphate, I'm surprised that that's off the market. I mean, like you can't get it without, I thought you could get it, just order it. I didn't know you had to
No,
have a
it is.
prescription.
It's a prescription drug.
See,
But
I ran into the
we have
same
the
shit
same
with Diamox.
we have the same problem with ivermectin right now because we have people that are trying to get it for their horses, and it's also used as a heartworm treatment,
Yeah.
and we just can't get it right now.
Because people are using it for COVID.
Yep, and unfortunately, it's effective, and that's the stupid part,
All right, so stay tuned, subscribe, and make sure you tune in for the medications episode that will be part 2 or 3 with Ask Seahorse Source. I'm
Write
saying
down the
goodnight,
names
guys.
you want to know about, and hopefully we'll have something for you.
No, we will have your answers. All right, say cheers, guys. I'm calling it. I got to.
Cheers.
Yeah, I've got
Good night,
to go.
everyone. Happy Wine
Night.
Wednesday.
Good night,
Cheers.
all. Thank you for coming, Dan.